This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday Twilight Show here on Teachers Talk Radio. I'm your host, Michelle, and joining me tonight are two exceptional guests, Jerry Robinson and Manny Awuyelu. Together, we will explore the behind the scenes of excluded students. What happens to our young people post exclusion? Are they equipped for lifelong success? Stay tuned.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello there, everyone, and welcome again. Welcome back to the Wednesday Twilight Show with your host, Michelle. It is a pleasure to be back this fortnight to share another insightful topic and something I think that is very topical in education. Last fortnight, I looked at the remnants of the Victorian education system and discussed whether or not they're relevant today or the extent to which they have influenced education in the 21st century. Thank you for the comments that were made based on that particular show, the comments, the feedback, and also sharing your own opinions as well. This week, however, and today, we will be delving into the world of alternative provision for our excluded students, evaluating the rates of success and the impact they have on our young people. The question is, are we doing enough to set them up for a prosperous future? So that is the focus tonight. And before we begin the discussion, and before I welcome my exceptional guests tonight, I just want to frame the discussion with some background research and information and clarify some terms as well. So first of all, I think it's important for me to explain, for those who are not in education, what is alternative provision? So often when we think of exclusions, we think of alternative provision. So what is it really? So alternative provision, or AP, provides education to pupils who are unable to attend mainstream schools for one reason or another. This is often, but not always, due to exclusion. Within the AP sector, there are a variety of types of providers that cater for pupils with diverse needs, abilities, and reasons for being in AP. Now, when I speak to my guests later on, I'm sure they will enlighten us a little bit more as to what that is all about. I also decided to take a brief look at the evolution of alternative provision in the UK, and this was done based on research. Now, in the UK, it has evolved significantly over time. And in the 60s and 70s, systemic biases led to the disproportionate placement of certain groups, particularly Black children, in specialized schools labeled as educationally subnormal. So, really interesting times back then. The 1980s, however, saw a shift towards community based care, influenced by research advocating for the deinstitutionalization. But by the 90s and the 2000s, AP became more structured with the establishment of what we call pupil referral units, or PRUs, as some people refer to it as, to support excluded students. So the 2010s brought policy reforms such as the Children and Families Act 2014, which then expanded SEND provisions but placed financial strain on local authorities, as you could imagine. So in the 2020s, increasing demand and budget constraints continue to challenge the system, prompting ongoing efforts to improve support for our vulnerable students. Despite progress towards inclusivity, funding and equitable service delivery remain a pressing concern. And we know that in education, funding is always an issue. And for alternative provision to support or excluded students, that remains a problem. So, without further ado, I am going to welcome tonight's guests, and I am so happy to introduce them. So, joining me tonight is a young man I met approximately a year ago. He was speaking at a conference, sharing his experience as a student who was excluded from school. And I don't think there was a dry eye left in that conference that day. We were all riveted by the way he articulated his experiences. That, however, did not impede his progress because today he is an experienced inclusion specialist in the Middle East. He has been in special education and leadership for over a decade across public and international schools. And as a former charity director, he supported disenfranchised students with mentorship and employment opportunities. He's a passionate writer and advocate for inclusive education. So, Manny or Manuel, welcome and thank you so much for joining me tonight. I look forward to hearing about your own experience, retrospectively as a student, and of course, now as a teacher. So, thank you so much for joining us on Teachers Talk Radio. And it is indeed an honor to also welcome another exceptional guest, a stalwart in the field of education, and that's Miss Jerry Robinson. Jerry is Executive Head Teacher of Haringey Learning Partnership, or HLP, a network of alternative provision schools and services in Haringey. Prior to moving into alternative provision, Jerry was head teacher of a local mainstream secondary school. She's an activist who's committed to tackling social injustice through inclusive education. Jerry is a Collective Ed Fellow, member of the LGBT Ed Advisory Board, a regular contributor to Schools Week, and part of the Alternative Provision Research Network, Steering Board, and the National Solutions Council. Under Jerry's leadership, HLP won the Silver Award for Impact through partnership at the Pearson National Teaching Awards in recognition that HLP has shifted perceptions of alternative provision in the community and helped local people to see that their students have just as much to offer as their peers in mainstream. How impressive. So you can see for yourselves, listeners, that I have two really well versed expert guests tonight to share with us and to shed some light on what happens to our students after exclusion. Jerry, it's an honor to welcome you to our show tonight. Thanks for taking the time out to give us insight into the provisions available for young people and to discuss the barriers and possible solutions. So, for those of you who've already joined on the show, thank you so much. Remember to download the app and you could call in or you could just comment, share your comments, ask your questions. We are here to take them. And I don't know if you've all noticed that we have two activists tonight on our show. So that is an indication of how passionate the discussion will be. So once again, welcome to you both. Thanks again for joining. And we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going straight into the questions.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
And there you have it. I can assure you that if you're into edubooks, definitely check out John Katz. So welcome back to the show. Tonight we're talking about life after exclusion for students, the challenges, the barriers, the rewards. And welcome again, my two exceptional guests already waiting to get into the question and to share their insights. So before we get into the core of the questions, Jerry and Manny, you may unmute so we can hear your voices now. I would like you both to give me some insight into, first of all, why you're so passionate about inclusion in education. And Jerry, I'm going to start with you first.
That's the $1,000,000 question. The why? Why? I think, I'll be honest with you. I didn't have a burning vocation to be a teacher, which I know is probably not what I'm supposed to say, but it's true. I finished school. I didn't really know, I went to university, didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I kind of fell into teaching really out of not being quite sure about where I wanted to be or what I wanted to do next. And the first school that I taught in Newcastle, which is where I'm from, was a school that really wasn't in a good place at all. And I hated every minute of it. And after a year, I decided that teaching wasn't for me, and I left and decided to go back to study more and think again about what I wanted to do with my future. And then after that, I ended up in a role in a pupil referral unit in Gateshead, which is just close to Newcastle. And it was a terrible experience also. The children weren't really being taught anything. It felt very much kind of like a youth club, but not a well-run youth club. And by this point, I was feeling pretty disillusioned. And then I experienced some kind of real personal kind of tragedy, and my brother died very suddenly. And I decided that I just needed to get away from it all and rethink. So I went to China, which is where I ended up teaching in a Chinese state secondary school with classes of 60 children. But 60 children who weren't always very happy. And whilst there were lots of great things about that experience, again, it was another look at an education system that just didn't seem to be working as well as it could and wasn't working for everyone. And so those three experiences, for lots of different reasons, made me think again. And I thought back to my first experience as an NQT in Newcastle, ECT now, and the PRU. And I think what I realized at that point was actually those children really were being failed by the system. And perhaps I needed to rethink, and I did rethink and thought, actually, I can contribute. And, it's easy to walk away and say the system's failing the children, but what about trying to help to change that system? And so I came back to the UK after a year and a half in China and applied for a teaching job in London, and then worked in a secondary school just near King's Cross in Somerstown. And I was there for 7 years, and I really rediscovered my love of teaching, but also began to realize that if we all just said the system's failing kids, which we can say and still do say, but didn't try to change it, then I felt like we have a moral obligation to try and change that system. And that's why, part of the reason why, I feel so passionate about inclusion. I think I've seen different models, different education systems, and I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And I think I've learned a lot from those experiences. And then more recently, I think as a head teacher in mainstream, I think now that I'm in the role that I'm in at Haringey Learning Partnership, and I reflect on my experiences as a head in mainstream, I think back to some of the decisions that I made as a mainstream head teacher, particularly around exclusion. And I don't think I always got it right. And I think back to particular children, particular students, and think, is there something we could have done differently? And it makes me sad to say it, but I do think there are cases where we could have done something different. I think I've learned a huge amount being in the role that I'm in now. And again, I feel that I can use that knowledge to help
Yeah.
to help other people to think about what inclusive education really can look like.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jerry. Recently, I had another guest on, and he said he stayed in teaching because he wanted to stay until the miracle happened. And I guess that's what you've done. And even though you try to move away from it, the pull is too great, isn't it?
Yeah,
You
it
just
is.
have to come back because that's exactly where you're meant to be. Manny, over to you. Why are you so passionate about this particular field?
About this field. Very similar, I guess, to Jerry. I had no real intention of getting into education. I'd probably be up there with one of the school. And I mean, in short, I do think that I think two things happened. I think my experience of being excluded from school, and initially in primary school, and then again when I was 15, in the year of my GCSEs, uh, and my purpose in life, and for sure, teaching wasn't um, into. But then a happened where after uni, as you are, you're lost, you don't know what to do. And I became a sports coach and I
Yeah.
started working in a school. And I volunteered if I could, just do some work experience in a classroom. And the lovely head teacher at the time, she offered me an opportunity to do 2 weeks as a learner support assistant.
Mhm. Are you still there, Manny?
Hello.
Yes, your sound went off a little bit. So you stopped at the head teacher gave you the opportunity to be a learning support assistant.
Gave me an opportunity to be a learner support assistant, and the 2 weeks turned into 5 months. And I think it was in that time that I realized that stage I still didn't think I would be a teacher, and it took a number of people around me to say, "Manny, you have a gift. You need a teacher." And I thought about my school experience, and I thought about what I missed, what I was lacking, and also what I didn't see. And I kind of made a vow to myself to say, well, if I'm going to go into this, and I usually
Hmm.
go into things full throttle, then I'm going to be exactly what I didn't see,
Yeah.
which was a young black male
Hmm.
supporting young people, and also just an experience in terms of teachers and educators who really value the voices of their students, really show compassion. And these are just the things that I didn't experience myself personally. So I made a commitment to myself to be what I didn't see as a
Yeah.
child. And so that's why I'm still passionate about it. It's still it's still the thing that drives me till this day. And like Jerry, I've worked in special education for 5 years. I became a Senko within that same school. I went into mainstream education. I'm now working as an international educator, and children need and what they require, but also the same things are missing across the board. And I
Yeah.
feel like that job, that role that we have to educate children holistically, um, will not be required. And I'm quite there as I was 10, 11 years ago when I became a
Fantastic.
teacher to see that happen. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And it's important to note to everybody who's listening that, we all enter teaching for various reasons and at different stages in our development after secondary education or university education. So, in previous shows, we've had people who've made that decision since they were children, like myself, I'm going to become a teacher. So, people are inspired at different stages of their lives to be a part of what I think is this very, very noble profession. So thank you so much both for that. Jerry, I'm coming back to you. Based on your experience, what are the most common reasons why students are excluded from mainstream schools? Because you mentioned as a head teacher, you've seen where there were points where that could have been avoided. So could you share with us some of the reasons why we resort to exclusions?
I mean, it's easy to kind of give the categories or the criteria that would be recorded in terms of DFE data, for example. However, I think that tells just such a small part of the story. So when you look at data, you look at the most common reason for exclusion being around persistent disruptive behavior. And actually, when you unpick that and what that looks like and what that can mean, it can mean so many different things. And certainly for us, in terms of Haringey Learning Partnership, so many times we have children coming to us where that's been the reason for exclusion. And we begin to kind of assess and understand that young person's needs. And so many times, actually, there is so much more going on, and that young person hasn't received the support that they need in the classroom. I think we also see children, so that would be, I would say, I guess, around children, particularly with undiagnosed needs, who haven't received the support. And I think, sadly, in the system, we know that there is a significant, still a significant amount of systemic racism in the education system. And we see children who have been labelled as naughty or badly behaved, particularly from, I think, in different areas of the UK, but in London, particularly children of Black Caribbean heritage who have been given a label of being naughty or badly behaved, when actually that wouldn't be the case for their white peer. And I think that's definitely something that, and maybe we'll pick up further in the conversation. But then we'll also get children referred to us where schools have a zero tolerance policy around, particularly around drugs and particularly around weapons. And obviously that those things could look very different. And, you know, could be from a pencil sharpener blade to a zombie knife. And, you know, those things can be treated exactly the same in some schools. And so we do get children coming to us for those reasons also. But I think the kind of the catch-all of persistent disruptive behavior, whatever that actually really means, is the most common reason for children being excluded from school.
Thank you so much. So do you think enough is being done then in mainstream to support? And I mean, where is this lack coming from? Is it lack of funding, lack of teacher training? What is the real issue there then?
It's hard. Of course it's hard. And, you know, and I'm not here to criticize mainstream schools. You know, I worked in mainstream almost my entire career and was a head teacher in mainstream school. But I'm also be the first person to acknowledge it's not easy. And I think particularly kind of post-COVID and some of the challenges that schools have seen post-COVID, I think, but we need to think also about some of the measures that put the pressures in place for our schools and our school leaders, you know, thinking particularly around accountability measures. And, you know, school leaders are held to extremely high account, not just by local authorities or government, but also by parents and carers, the local community, and the pressure to get a high progress 8 score, for example, or to make sure that your grade 5s and above is at a certain percentage, to make sure that you get an outstanding Ofsted grade. Those pressures are enormous. And I think that sometimes school leaders can find it difficult, I think, to find enough time to spend thinking about how do we include actually the children who maybe are finding it the hardest to fit into the school system, that maybe are the least likely to achieve those grades. Maybe the children who are struggling with attendance, you know, those children going to require a lot of time and a lot of support and a lot of thinking about. And I think that can be a real challenge. And I think until we have a system that values inclusion and recognizes that not all children's achievement looks exactly the same, and actually some of the best schools are the schools that include children the most, then then I think we will continue to see children who don't fit into the system being ejected from it.
Yeah. And I think for me, Jared, the key takeaway there for me is until we value inclusion, um, and recognizing that not all achievement look the same, then the cycle will continue. And I think it is so important. And when I read your introduction, you mentioned getting the silver award for helping to remove that stigma attached to inclusion within the community. And I think if more people continue to do that, hopefully we'll see a shift in the tide.
And I think it's really important to say as well, and I think it's something that I've certainly learnt over time is, it's a false dichotomy to say that you can either be kind and inclusive and or you can have high standards and good outcomes, and that it's an either or. I think that is something that we are led to believe, that there's these extremes. You either are the school that has really strict discipline and gets high results, or you're the school that's inclusive but your results won't be as good. And actually you can be inclusive and have high standards and get positive outcomes for children. And I think that's something that I don't think everybody understands fully.
Yes, I completely agree. And it requires a mindset shift as well, starting from educators, policymakers, government, all of us will have to be involved, the community, parents. Thank you so much. Manny, could you give us some insight into what led to your exclusions from mainstream school? So Jerry just shared with us some of the common reasons, and I'd like to hear from you now. What were some of the reasons? If you recall, that is.
Yeah, I do recall it. It's quite core memories for me, to be honest. So the first one, in brief, I was in year five. I was 10 years old, and when I think about that time, I can't help but contextualize it and consider the area that I lived in. So I grew up in Southeast London at the time, in an area called Bermondsey, which was
Yes.
known, notoriously for it's quite, I don't know how to word this, but it was a large racist community at the time, and Millwall fans, which many people are aware of,
Yeah.
that we were essentially surrounded by them. So you can imagine just being an African family living in apartment blocks, in quite a racist area. So I say that because uh, the population of the school, it reflected also the community that we lived in. So it was quite a tricky experience, not just for myself, but also for my parents. And I saw that, and even at a young age, I knew that we were not just marginalized, but we were somewhere that it felt like we shouldn't be. And so my school experience was largely negative up until that point in which I got excluded. And the actual incident was something so small, but I think it represents a bigger picture. And the incident itself was, um, so I was in a group in the classroom. We were supposed to be doing some work. The teacher had asked me a question. I didn't know the answer to the question, so she asked me to stand up, and I stood up, and she asked me again. I didn't know the answer to it, and then she tried to kind of embarrass me in front of the classroom by saying something. I can't remember what she said to me at the time, and I said the term "for goodness sake" under my breath. And I'd said it because it's something I had heard her say all academic year. And she sent me out essentially, and she told me to stand outside of the classroom door. So I did that. And then with like 5 minutes, I think she riled herself up, and she said, actually, in fact, you need to go to the head teacher's office. And so I went to the office, and there was a young boy sitting there, and he looked like quite shaky. So I asked him, "What's wrong? Why are you here?" He said, "I've been sent here." And then I just went on this rant. And again, I'm 10 years old. I shouldn't have done it, but I knew the context, of where I was living, and also the school I was in. So I just started saying the stuff to this child. I was like, the school's racist, the teacher's racist. Look at the way they're treating us. Why are we here? And as I'm saying all of this, the head teachers actually walked in at the same time. Long
Okay.
story short, that situation ended with him saying, "This is, your last day at the school. You're not going to be here, and good riddance." And so that was the last time I joined that school. And I think for my parents, it was as disappointing as it was. I think there was a bit of relief actually that, you know what, this is an opportunity for a fresh start. And so if you fast forward many years after that, I was in a secondary school in East London now, where my parents had moved to, and the situation again was something in my mind quite small. Wasn't a big issue. Me and my best friend, we were in the classroom, probably not paying attention as much as we should have done. And the class teacher asked us to leave. So we left, and then we realized actually we need our coursework, otherwise we're not going to pass our GCSEs this year without that coursework being done. So my friend went to get the coursework. It turned into a little bit of like a pool with the coursework, and the coursework fell on the floor. That ended up in the teacher saying that we had assaulted her. Teachers were running down the corridor after us as if, we had basically assaulted this teacher, and there were 30 witnesses in the classroom. We had done no such thing. So again, a situation
Wow.
that I wouldn't say it's small, it's a big deal. I'm a teacher now. I understand the context of situations like that. But the teacher gave an account that wasn't accurate. And what she painted me and my friend as, we were like treated like criminals, despite there being 30 witnesses to see what had actually happened. And that decision turned into me being excluded initially, permanently, and then that decision was then reversed, and then they internally excluded us. So for me, the impact of that decision was far more important than the actual incident itself, because we then didn't take our GCSE classes with the rest of our peers. We did it in an isolated room or space within the
Wow.
school. And then there were certain lessons we could not then partake in. And so we had to take additional classes after school, like drama, just to be able to make up the GCSEs. And that actually ultimately led to me just leaving school with 4 A to C GCSEs. So the ripple effect of all of that was, I'm going to college now and I'm a year behind my peers because I have to retake my math GCSE in order to start my A levels, etc., etc. So so
Wow.
yeah, so those experiences, again, as an educator, I just think to myself, if they could have been handled a bit better. I just think the human side of what we do as teachers wasn't present in any
Yeah.
of those moments. And I think actually I'm an example of how it's worked out pretty well, because
Yeah.
most of my peers that were excluded around that same time, particularly in secondary school, unfortunately, um, don't have the same positive outcome in terms of being
Yeah.
able to find a route, um, out of that
Wow.
situation.
Manny, thank you so much for being so frank and open with us in sharing those two very personal incidents. Very touching for me as a teacher myself, because I'm just imagining the scenario in my head and just thinking, how would I have handled that? I don't think it would have gone as extreme as an exclusion. So, Jerry, I'm going to ask, as a head teacher, listening to those two incidents, how would you have responded to that, if you don't mind?
I always say that one of the most important things we can do is listen to our young people. And I think that's the thing that it sounds to me that really was missing in Manny's situation. And actually, it sounds like some really valid points were being raised, particularly in that incident where you were talking about the school being racist. And people don't just say these things. And I think if school leaders could listen more to young people,
Yeah.
which again, I know there are pressures around time, etc. But I think so many times when we have children who have been excluded, and exclusion itself is a really traumatic thing to go through. And they will say to me, but nobody, I did this or I did that. Nobody asked me why. And that really always sits with me as like, how can you make a decision to exclude a child without unpicking the reasons behind whatever it is that happened? And actually sometimes I think that if people just listened to a young person and understood and tried to empathize and actually be prepared that sometimes that young person might tell you something that you don't like,
Yeah.
and might reflect on your school or your system, but we are the adults, and we would hope that children could take feedback. And so therefore as adults we should be
Yeah.
able to take feedback also. And unfortunately, I know from experience that isn't always the case. But I think my key thing, I mean, it makes sense while we're listening to a radio program as well, is that people just need to listen more
Yeah.
and be curious and try to understand what has actually gone on for a young person, that's led to the situation that they're in.
Yeah, I
Not
completely
jump,
agree,
not
and
jump to
that's what I.
conclusions.
Sorry?
I've not jumped to conclusions.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if coming from a 10-year-old as well.
Mm,
That's what I jotted down whilst Manny was speaking. Just listen. Why do you feel this way? And, children live what they learn. The teacher
mm,
constantly says, for goodness sake. So this 10-year-old felt that was
yeah,
an appropriate way to express your frustration.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So it is so important that we do listen to our children because, as you said there, Jerry, sometimes it's not easy for us to hear it and the truth and the raw truth, but it's what we do with it that is so
Mm,
important. And then to walk in on a conversation like that, as you've said, yeah, just listen. Why do you feel that way?
mm,
What makes you feel that way, rather than then making that decision. Um, Manny, you mentioned a little bit about the impact it had on you emotionally, but if you could expand on that a little bit, what was it like? You talked about academically how it impacted you, but emotionally, how did that impact on you? And especially when your parents found out. You said your parents saw it as a fresh start, but when it got to the GCSE year, what was that like?
I mean, I don't, yeah, I don't want to make it seem as if also, my parents thought it was okay. So with a bit of context, my
Yeah.
parents come from West Africa, Nigeria specifically, and I am also the eldest. So if anyone knows, you have the world's expectations on your shoulders when that's the case. And so the
Hmm.
first exclusion was pretty embarrassing. I don't think it's something that my parents would have even admitted to our local community. And so I
Yeah.
think the move away from South London all the way across to East London, part of that decision I think was also just for a new and fresh environment, but also to run away from whatever stigmas might have come from the fact that their son had been excluded from school. And then when it happened the second time, I think there was a sense of there was a sense of disappointment for sure because I think my parents really had faith in the school as well as myself
Hmm.
as working class immigrants who believe with their whole heart that education is the key to a better life. They had drummed it into me since I could remember to talk. And so I think for them to see that all of their hard work, as they could see it, to come to this country, to the
Hmm.
UK, to give me a platform, to give me all of my basics in terms of my needs, they just needed me to get those grades. And so to leave school essentially as a failure for them, I just don't think they understood. And so for me, emotionally, it was embarrassing. Um,
Hmm.
we would make jokes, when you're 16, you make jokes, and it's like, your GCSE papers spell a word that doesn't have anything to do with A, B's, and C's in them. And you
Yeah.
kind of laugh with your mates and stuff, but the reality of it is it was embarrassing because now I'm going to
Hmm.
A levels. So I'm going to college and I can't take my A levels because I have to retake my maths GCSEs. And so I think from that point on, I just felt like I was behind my peers, all because of a decision that had a ripple effect that led to results that also had a ripple effect. So I think the word I would say is embarrassing, shame. Again, as the eldest, my parents, I felt like I had really disappointed them, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's very difficult to think of too many words outside of embarrassment
Yeah, I
and shame.
understand.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think often, the teachers on the other end of the spectrum, they're probably not even aware of the far-reaching emotional impact such a decision could make on our students and how it impacts on you as well in your future life and decisions that you make. So, Manny, I know you'll have to go soon because, yes, you're calling from the Middle East and it is way past our bedtime here. So, before you go, however, you mentioned earlier that some of your peers didn't make it out, so to speak, and weren't as successful as a result of being excluded. So, could you share with us how did you rise above that and to become who you are today? How did you rebuild or maintain your sense of purpose?
It's a very good question. I don't think it is one thing in particular. So a series of events took place across my life between the age of 16 till now, I would say, that led to that. I think the first one was so that friend who I was excluded with in year 10, he tragically passed away when we were 17. And the impact he had on my life as an individual. it kind of spurred me on to be someone of influence to other people. So I kind of held that in my heart, even though I didn't know what I wanted to do. And
Yeah.
so, um, like I said, I left university, had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I think the next significant thing that happened is somebody gave me a chance. And that was the head teacher at Cubitt Town Junior School, Robin Bruce. She gave me a chance. She didn't have to. She said, "You can come and work here for 2 weeks." I had no experience, nothing being in the classroom. And then when that 2 weeks turned into 5 months, she did something else that was quite critical that I always kind of go back to and I think about as a leader myself, which is that she empowered me enough to say, Manny, one day you will be an amazing teacher. I genuinely, with all of my heart, could not think of anything further than what she had said. I had no intention of being a teacher. I didn't see myself as a teacher. I didn't think I was particularly good. And she said from very early on, even as a TA, she said, "Manny, you're going to be a teacher one day. Um, don't run from the responsibility." And she made sure that I trained to be a teacher. And so if I didn't have her as an advocate,
Yeah.
first of all, I would never consider to even get into teaching. And then
Fantastic.
the I think aside from family being a massive support, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she's been there throughout the whole journey. Um, there is a spiritual side to it because I am someone that believes in the spiritual side of things, and I think I'm going to use the word calling here, and I think everything I experienced from the exclusions to the amazing English teacher that I did have in school to the opportunity to work in a school, all of that, I just felt like it was part of a journey to get to where I am right now. And I think ultimately, because my heart from a very young age was, I don't know what I want to do, but I want to make a difference in the world and I want to change the world for the better. And I think I found education was the one significant way to be able
Yeah.
to do that. And I've continued to believe in that the longer I've stayed in the profession. So, um, so it's a series of events. It's
Yeah.
um, a combination of people on that journey who have been sent, I believe, as destiny helpers, whether they're encouragers, whether they're people who empower me, whether they're people who mentor me, or it could just be my wife who reminds me on days like today, for instance, where I'm just like, I don't know if I can keep going. Uh, that level of support
Yeah.
continuously, I think for me is how I was able to overcome. And genuinely, I love to teach as well.
Yeah.
So um, I think that magic that happens when you're in a room with just one child or a group of children or a whole classroom, and the interactions, the relationships you can have, the light bulb moments, the families, delight at their children just making progress, whatever that looks like. That feeling doesn't go, and I think as long as I can experience that on a day-to-day basis, um, I will always endeavor to try and be the best that I can be because I believe education is,
Yeah.
ultimately the one thing that can change society. So yeah.
Totally agree. Thank you so much. So, from that, Manny, we're saying family support is important to help raise the confidence levels. Shout out to all the English teachers as well,
Amazing.
all
Yep.
the teachers in general. Sorry, I'm being biased because I'm an English teacher, but shout out to all teachers who see that nugget in our students and continue to nurture that and to help them to blossom to be holistic human beings and supporting in every other way as well those destiny helpers who come along and encourage. That is so important. Thank you so much for that, Manny. um, Jerry, often as teachers we think that the students who are excluded, and especially those who are excluded frequently, that they're so hardened and immune to discipline and everything, and so they have this exterior that we think is so tough. But from your experience as head teacher of mainstream and now in alternative provision, how would you describe students' typical reaction to exclusion, both emotionally and academically? So we heard from Manny, but from your perspective, what is it usually like?
I think people underestimate the impact of exclusion, and certainly I think as a mainstream head, I don't think I fully understood the impact on a young person's mental health and emotional well-being. And I think it's not often talked about, really. I think we talk about the impact of exclusion and what that could mean for a young person's academic outcomes. And obviously, we hear the term "through to prison pipeline" quite a lot. And they're the things that people talk about. And I think what we don't actually acknowledge is that complete breakdown in a relationship And I think for children and young people, it's, particularly if you have a child, say, who's been to a school, primary school, for 5 years, they've then been in their secondary school, as is often the case, up to year 10 or 11. They've grown up with the same kids, they've been part of a peer group, they've established relationships, and then something happens which means that they're excluded from school. The trauma, and I don't use the word trauma lightly here, I think the trauma of that is huge. And in life, when racial relationships break down, we often have an opportunity at some point to repair that relationship. And in schools, we talk about, that repair all of the time when children are in conflict or there's an issue with a teacher. But when there's an exclusion, there isn't any opportunity for repair. So there's that rupture, that complete breakdown, and you have no opportunity to mend that or fix that. And you lose all power in that situation, and the sense of control for the young person is lost completely. And that's difficult. And I think there's then so many layers to it, really, because there's then also the shame that comes with exclusion. And speaking to a child yesterday, or the day before, from HLP, he was being interviewed actually for Sky News, and he was talking about the shame and how worried he was about his parents' reaction to his exclusion, what that would mean for them, the shame for them of when he was then going to be coming to a pupil referral unit. We don't call it a pupil referral unit, we call it a school, because I think there's so much stigma attached to that term. And how his mum wasn't able to tell her friends because she was ashamed. And he was carrying all of that. And, emotionally, for a child, dealing with all of that, added to the fact that you're then in a new environment and trying to make sense of it, I think it can go, it can play out in different ways. I think sometimes we have children who will come into alternative provision having experienced all of that, and then they're in a new environment and they can begin to sometimes behave in different ways or seek validation from peers in different ways, because they're trying to somehow desperately kind of seek some control and turn what has been a really negative experience into something that feels more positive, or that they can own in some way. And almost like sometimes we'll kind of wear a label to suggest that being in alternative provision is cool in some way, or and actually I don't think they often really think that at all. But it's about trying to make sense of what's happened to them, and find a way where they can feel that they do fit in and they're not excluded. To be told that you're not wanted is huge. And, that would be huge as an adult. So for a 14, 15-year-old, the impact is massive.
Yeah. And Jerry, do you think it also impacts on their trust? I mean, does it affect their trust of others?
Yeah, and I think we spend a lot of time when children first join us, and I mean always and throughout their time with us, of rebuilding trust, and rebuilding trust with professionals, rebuilding trust with schools, but not just for, Manny spoke about family, but not just between the child and the school, but also with the family. And the families, their most recent experience of being in a school setting could have been in a governor's panel where they're being told X, Y, and Z about their child, and that their child, is very much labelled as somebody who cannot be in school. And, I'm sure that some schools try to do it in a way that isn't, doesn't feel overly critical to the family. But I think so often when parents and carers come to us, that is their experience, and therefore, trust in school and in education is really difficult, and that's something that we have to really work hard to rebuild.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you so much. Before we take another short break, Manny, how has your experience shaped you as a teacher? How has it shaped your approach to young people?
Um, Where do I even start? I think,
Ju-
I think, go on,
Yeah,
yeah.
you talked about the teachers not listening and, not allowing you to have a voice. So how has that really impacted on you as a teacher now?
It's impacted everything I do, to be honest, as a teacher, and it did the same as a assistant head, as a
Mm-hmm.
Senko. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think we forget sometimes that as teachers we are like the first point of contact for many of these children, and working in an alternative provision also. Um, Sometimes you are the friendliest face that that child might see that day. Sometimes the meals that they provided at school is the first or the best meal that they're going to get that day. So I think for me, the way it's impacted my teaching is just like I see every child as one, as an individual. I give every child the necessary amount of time that I can. And even when I'm not in the classroom, I just try and empower my teachers and my learner support assistants to just remember that um, young people just want to be seen, they want to be listened to, they want to be valued. Young people do want to learn, but sometimes experiences and circumstances that were out of their control make that very
Mm-hmm.
difficult. And uh, yeah,
Yeah.
relationship is for me almost like priority and number one. I know it's like something that's repeated, but it genuinely is. And because children, especially as they get older, they're not
Mm-hmm.
silly. They know the teachers that care about teaching, and they know the teachers that care about them as individuals.
Yeah.
And I think if you can find that combination, that sweet spot, you will have the children at the in the palm of your hands.
Yeah.
It's just such an easy fundamental thing. But I do genuinely think that my experience as a child who had a torrid time in school, and as someone that's worked now in schools where children are disadvantaged and disenfranchised and disengaged, I can see firsthand the impacts that a teacher, a good, welcoming, um, passionate, but kind teacher can have. And so I try and
Mm.
instill that in my teachers, and I just try and make sure I can model that as best as I can for my young people.
Fantastic. And for me, just listening to both of you, even being in the classroom and beginning to think about sanctions within the classroom as well. And sometimes, as a teacher, do I go to the extreme too quickly? Do I give the students a chance, as you said earlier, Jerry, to repair, or do I immediately go for the sanctions? How quickly do I go for the rewards as opposed to the sanctions as opposed to the rewards? And I think even at the classroom level, these are things I think we need to think about, how quickly we're ready to reprimand rather than understanding what's going on. And especially these days when our young people do have an opinion, yeah, it's just so important that we understand that. We're going to go for a short break, and then when we come back, we'll continue with our discussion. And believe it or not, by the time we come back, we're in the final stretch of tonight's program. Those of you who've already joined and have been tuning in, thank you so much. I hope you're learning a lot from the session tonight. Do send us your message or comments or questions. Emily, thank you. Emily says, so inspiring. So thanks to my guests for that. So do stay tuned. We're just going to go for a short break.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So far tonight, we're talking about life after exclusion. We've also looked at the things that we could do to prevent taking things to that extreme, but also trying to remove the stigma from alternative provision so that students don't see it as somewhere you go because you failed, but somewhere where you're taking a different path in order to become just as successful as anybody else in mainstream schools. So, this next segment of the program, we're going to talk about some of those challenges, some of the barriers, and the way forward. So, continue to stay tuned and please remember to download the Podbean app, send us your questions, your comments, or just to say hi. Give us a like as well whilst you're at it. Thank you so much in advance. So, Jerry, have you noticed any patterns in the types of students who are more likely to be excluded? And you hinted at that earlier, the Afro-Caribbean students, but pattern, maybe not just ethnicity, but maybe socioeconomic status as well. And are there underlying factors that schools should address earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, you're right. We touched on it previously. And I think we know what the data tells us in terms of groups of students who are most likely to be excluded. And it absolutely, we see overrepresentation of children, as we said, of Black Caribbean heritage, but also most significantly of Gypsy Roma traveller heritage. And that's definitely continues to be the case. And any data set that you look at around exclusions, we also see that boys are much more frequently excluded than girls. We see that children on free school meals or children with pupil premium are more likely to be excluded. We see that children with SEN are most likely to be more likely to be excluded. All of these factors, have a massive impact. And then you can dig down into the data even deeper, and children with a social worker are more likely to be excluded. So the children who, have, already some significant challenges in their lives,
Yeah.
absolutely are at the highest risk of exclusion. Children who, as I say, could be open to social care for various different reasons, are by and large massively overrepresented in exclusion figures.
Do you think enough is being done, though, to stem the flow of exclusions? Or have we as a society come to accept, well, yeah, these students are destined for exclusion? Or,
I'd hope not. I think that would be a terrible position for us to be
yeah.
in. I hope that there is hope out there, and I do think there is hope out there, and there are lots of people who are actively working to change the system. And, I was at the launch yesterday of the Differences Who's Losing Learning report, which was talking very much about what we need to do in schools to address the issue of exclusion. And not just the exclusions that you see in terms of
Yeah.
academic exclusion, but also those kind of exclusions that sometimes, what we could call them grey exclusions, that you don't really see. So the children who spend all the time in isolation, or the children who are told to stay at home, or the children who are managed moved to another school, they might not show up in the data, but all of those
Yeah.
groups that are overrepresented are also overrepresented in the internal isolation or in the detention room. And it's just trying to get schools to think about exclusion in all of its forms. And I think
Yeah.
that there is some optimism, there's some positivity. I think we have people who are actively trying to change the system. I do think we also have a narrative that is almost completely at odds with that. And I think it comes back to what I was saying before about this kind of false dichotomy of the either or, because I think certainly and you can be drawn into social media and edgy Twitter and all of those things, but you can get very polarized views where it can be very much about need to have schools with really tight systems and structures, and there can be no kind of deviation or understanding of individual need within that. And that's the right way to go, because that will lead to the best outcomes for young people, which will lead to improved life chances. Or we can talk about trauma informed practice, but that will lead to children being failed. And we need to find the middle ground, because actually it isn't either or. And yes, children respond well to firm boundaries and consistency, but we can also do that in a way which is compassionate and understand individual need.
And that is the key word there, Jerry. We can do it by being compassionate. And sometimes we're just too draconian in our ways, aren't we? And rigid. And there's no leeway. And this is how it is. And there's absolutely no other way. And we become too rigid with that. Thank you so much. So, Manny, what advice would you give to educators and policymakers to better support students facing exclusion from your perspective?
So do you mean children who are facing exclusion?
Yeah,
Like,
children who you can tell, they're on that path based on school's expectations. What could we do to prevent some of those?
um, I think I think for me it's thinking outside of the box. I mean, first and foremost, it's people in those positions having um, that sense of humanity and just recognizing that we're working with very fragile young people. And we've mentioned this many times about being compassionate and being kind, but it's generally the fundamental trait that we need to have as educators, and then being excellent teachers on top of that. But I think for me, thinking outside of the box, because what we found is there are still young people who are going through this process of being marginalized and then being excluded, and then the pathways after that uh, are quite tragic. And so I think thinking outside of the box in terms of what programs or initiatives or projects or organizations can be considered, can we collaborate with that can help our mission. And if your mission is to keep every child in the school and for every child to be educated and for their needs to be met, then you have to, in the context of your school, think about all possibilities. So I'll give you an example. Between 2017 to 2024, I also ran a mentoring company called the Reach Out Project, and we were very fortunate to have schools who were open-minded enough to have professionals who, in their own time, would go into the school and provide one-to-one mentoring, but also group mentoring. And then that developed into a program where actually we provided work experience for these young people. So we would collaborate with companies like Facebook, with ITV, BBC, and we would take these young people to these workplaces specifically so that they could see what it was like to be in that particular professional setting, but so that they can actually get the experience of working there. And what happened is, for some children, it birthed a passion that they didn't realize was there in the first place. And for some children, it made them realize, oh, actually, that dream I had of being a graphic designer is possible now. And so between the work experiences, the cultural trips, the one-to-one mentoring, the group mentoring, the sports days, the collaboration, the uni days, we were able to get a group of young people who were on the brink of exclusion, some of them already excluded and working in alternative provisions. And we were able to give them an alternative. We were able to give them a sense of actually, if I could do well in school on, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there is something that I can work towards on a Friday that's actually tangible. And so that's just a small example of how if schools could think outside of the box rather than just thinking about rules and regulations in their policies and then what happens at lunchtime and detention, and just think like look at your community specifically, like what do those families need, what do those children need. It could be as small as a breakfast club, it could be after school, it could be that you just need to set up a football team, it could be that you need to bring in a mentoring program or develop mentors within your own staff. So I can't give every school a one answer approach. But what I can say is if you think outside of the box in the context of your school, what is it that isn't being done that we could do to meet the needs of those specific children? Um,
Yeah,
and Jerry and the work that she's doing, I
yeah,
would suggest that teachers also, especially if they're young in their career, spend some time in alternative provision and SEMH schools. Because if I hadn't had that experience myself as an NQT, I don't think I would be as well versed in the things that I am right now. And your teacher training doesn't prepare you for any of that, and it still
yeah.
doesn't. So being intentional about going out there and seeking opportunities to see what it's like in those settings, I think also would be quite valuable for any educator or leader for that
Yeah.
matter.
Excellent points there, Manny. And I like the idea of getting early career teachers, especially to visit some of these schools, spend a day and just, shadow another teacher and see what it's really like and learn from it as well. I think that's such a good idea because not everything you learn in your teacher training program. And just to build on that, Jerry, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about excluded students that you wish more educators and policymakers to understand? And also, if you could just link that to how can mainstream schools do more to prevent these exclusions?
Biggest misconceptions, I guess, that they don't care about their education, that they can't achieve, that they're not able to achieve. I think all of those misconceptions still exist. And I think, unfortunately, what we've seen nationally, and I'm really optimistic that there have been some significant improvements in quality of alternative provision, but we're working with a kind of legacy of alternative provision not being good enough, and children receiving really poor outcomes when they do attend alternative provision. And that's not because those children don't care about their education, and it's not because they're not able to achieve, but it's because the provision that's been made for them has not been adequate. And I always say that we're alternative provision, but we should never be inferior provision. The children are with us for lots of complex reasons, and actually they deserve as good as mainstream, but in many ways they deserve more, and they need a better provision than mainstream, because for whatever reason mainstream has not worked for them at that point in time, and therefore we have really prioritized at HLP the quality of teaching and learning in the classroom, the quality of the curriculum. We need children to know that when they come to us, that they're going to have excellent teaching, they're going to have teaching from subject specialists. We are going to be entering them for a full suite of GCSEs if that's what's the best thing for that child, and that coming into an AP setting isn't going to limit what you can achieve educationally. And I'm really proud that we have, I think, really shown what is possible in alternative provision. And I think for our young people, like last year, and I recognise, there's still more progress to make, but last year 40% of our children left here with 5 GCSEs, including grade 4s and above in English and maths.
Awesome.
And the national average for alternative provision last year was 4.9%. So I think we've really demonstrated at HLP what is possible. And I know there are other APs similarly who are doing great work. And I think we have to move away from that misconception or perception of children that they can't achieve or don't want to achieve, because that absolutely isn't the case. Children want to do well, of course they do.
Yeah. Yes, they do. And even if they try to pretend as if, no, it's cool to be excluded, it's cool to, to be naughty, so to speak. They deep down, they want to do well, and they want to make their families proud. I completely agree with that. And just to, based on what you've both said, I think we need to think about the curriculum a lot. And the curriculum at the sometimes is not fit for purpose. And we tend to want to prepare all our young people for one particular path, and that is university. And that's not necessarily the path for everyone. It doesn't mean that you're not successful. So I honestly think that we need to think about those things. And also, you said, Jerry, alternative provision does not mean inferior. And I agree, and even in mainstream schools, I often say that you need to put your strongest teachers with the students that you consider to be less able. Because these are the students who need that expertise. The other students will be independent and will get it done anyway. And I think it's the same for the alternative provision. You just have to have the people with the skills there as well to make sure that these young people get the best.
And absolutely. And I think that's, we have had some fantastic teachers. We do have some fantastic teachers at Haringey Learning Partnership, and often teachers who've had previous experience in mainstream schools, often from the local area, and really kind of know the curriculum in and out, know the quality of teaching and learning, are able to support the young people to the same standard, if not a higher standard than they would have achieved in mainstream. But I totally agree as well around the curriculum and the pathways. And that's, why I think there are such problems with things like the Progress 8 measure or the EBAC.
Yes.
And I think that, hopefully through the curriculum review that's happening currently, we'll see some shifts to some of those measures that broaden the curriculum and make other routes and pathways possible, and really value the arts as well. And I think that's something that I think we see some of our children really excelling in some of the arts that maybe they haven't had as much opportunity to engage with when they've been in mainstream.
Yeah, totally agree. We're going to break for the news, but before that, Manny, if there's one final message you'd like to leave with all educators about or young people and exclusion and anything around that, what would it be?
I think I would just say, in light of all the recent news regarding teacher exodus, it is still the most important job and role in the world. I know that even more so as a parent, and I think if we can just encourage teachers to remember their why are you getting into this, and I think use that as their driving force every single day, then I think they should remember then that even if they only have the impact that they desire on one child, it's more than enough. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think there needs to be some more training around unconscious bias as well. uh, in the process. Thank you so much, Manny. Thank you for sharing with us. That was really raw and insightful and frank and very honest. And thank you for sharing your vulnerabilities as well. And I'm sure people who download the podcast and listen back, it will definitely inspire someone, a teacher or a student. So thank you for that. We're going to break for the news. Stay tuned. When we come back, we're on the final stretch where we'll continue to hear from Jerry various other things about exclusion and some of the success stories that she has witnessed over the years. Stay tuned.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Website covers comments by Ofsted Chief Inspector Sir Martin Oliver as he accused the most vocal critics of the proposed reforms to inspection. He said proposed report cards for schools are not and never were going to bring about the end of grading. In a speech to the Association of School and College Leaders annual conference in Liverpool, Sir Martin said giving parents and families the information they need in a clear and accessible way was a must-have. Head teachers in the audience at the conference laughed when Sir Martin said he did not want them to be doing anything for Ofsted. Last month, Ofsted launched a consultation on its plans to introduce a new report card system for grading schools in England. Under the proposal, schools could be graded across a variety of areas using a colour-coded 5-point scale. The scale would range from causing a concern to exemplary. Education unions have criticised the proposals for being even worse than the current system. Sir Martin said the report cards were never going to sacrifice much needed clarity for parents. He also said that anyone who thought that report cards were going to end assessment was mistaken, and they weren't paying close enough attention to what parents want, politicians promised, and what children deserve. Ofsted has faced increased criticism since the death of head teacher Ruth Perry. The government announced last year that headline Ofsted grades for overall effectiveness would be scrapped. In response, the president of ASCL, a serving head teacher, said the new report card system felt like a kick in the teeth. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson also told the conference that she knew the proposed changes were challenging and that they sparked debate, but that it was an important national conversation. She went on to say that Ofsted were putting out genuine consultations on the changes. Full details, comments and responses from the sector can be found online. The BBC News website features the issue of emotional literacy amongst men and boys. The charity Beyond Equality, which works with young men on tackling issues around violence against women and girls and the topic of masculinity, had been spoken about by them on BBC Radio London. Ben Hurst from the charity says he believes there is a real systemic issue across the UK with how boys and men have been socialised to move through and experience the world. He said, they manifest in a range of different ways, and lots of ways are wildly inappropriate. He told the BBC Radio London team that the work of Beyond Equality was to have conversations with men and boys before violent or abusive situations arise, and to try and address gender equality through the lens of masculinity, with an approach that asks questions like, what is masculinity? How does that feel? Do we like it? And would we change it if we could? The BBC programme followed the sentencing of Hassan Sentamu, convicted of the murder of a 15-year-old girl in September 2023. Schools Week features an exclusive report on CEO pay and the rises which it says have sparked inflationary spirals in some of the biggest spending trusts. In its annual executive pay investigation, data has shown more than 60 trusts had leaders paid at least £200,000 last year, with 95% of them awarded rises. National Governance Association Deputy CEO Sam Henson said salary benchmarking is in some cases leading to inflationary spirals, and they don't come with an accompanying narrative on how this deals with the massive pressures the sector is under. The article goes on to say that the gap is widening between CEOs and the rest in the highest paying trusts. 19 of the 31 highest paid chief executives saw the gap grow. A full table of CEO pay can be found on the Schools Week website. Top of the table is Harris Federation, with their CEO being England's best paid and the first to cross the £500,000 threshold. Sharon O'Ryan of Payne Education said there was usually a strong positive linear correlation between CEO pay and pupil numbers, but this is predominantly in the early phases of trust growth. And that it flattens to a maximum salary for the job regardless of size. 22% of the highest earners are women, similar to last year's 23%. But a Confederation of Schools Trust Pay survey found women CEOs earn about £8,600 less than men, although the gap did narrow slightly. Full details of all the facts and figures, including some details of falling salaries, can be found on the Schools Week website. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
And there you have it. Lots to unpick from that. Some of those things could make a show on its own. But welcome back, everybody. And we're in the final stretch of tonight's show, the final section. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. And Jerry and Manny, thank you so much for all the comments and the information that you've given us and sharing your own thoughts, experiences, and opinions as well. So, Jerry, what challenges do you face as an educator in an alternative setting that mainstream teachers might not experience?
Sorry, I just my thing is just I lost it. The technically.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was asking what challenges do you face in the alternative provision setting that mainstream teachers might never face or might not have faced?
It's hard to say. I think it's different to mainstream, definitely, in that I think that, you know, we can get children who come to us feeling really rock bottom and almost feeling that there's no point anymore in terms of their education, and that they've been kind of told they're not good enough, and therefore, you know, there isn't any point in even trying. And I think that's something that is definitely different to being in mainstream and trying to, I mean, we spoke about it earlier, but trying to rebuild that confidence early on and make sure they know that actually, yes, you might be an alternative provision, but you can still be successful. I think is quite key and is a different experience to mainstream, definitely. I think
Yeah.
some of the challenges, I guess, for me in this role that are different to when I was in mainstream, is just the sheer volume of safeguarding work,
Okay.
which is huge. And, you know, we have a number of different sites, but in the site where our children come to us via the risk of school exclusion or risk of school exclusion, 80% of those children are open to social care. And so you can imagine with that, the number of meetings that come along with that, and plans, and the number of professionals working around each child, and the need to really kind of hold those professional networks together to make sure there is holistic support for that child is definitely different to mainstream. I think
And what is attendance generally like? Is that a main struggle as well? I mean,
no,
in mainstream we still have that, but is
yeah,
it?
our attendance is good, and I think, you know, historically it didn't used to be, and certainly before the organisation that existed before Harrogate Learning Partnership, attendance was really poor. And I think, again, it, you know, it requires make a kind of change in what happens in the provision to make sure that children see the value in coming to school. So our our teaching now is really good. We offer a huge range of opportunities and experiences for our young people, including, you know, working with various different organizations. But, you know, young people go sailing on a Monday, we go to Jamie's farm on a Friday, we have
Oh,
children
fantastic.
who go on residentials abroad. I think all of those things help our young people to see that there really is value in being in school, and actually they want to be in school. We run programs during the holidays as well, which are well attended, and I think school can become, you know, a really important and safe place for our children and young people. So again, I think there is a perception that attendance is poor in alternative provision. It really doesn't have to be.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds very promising, actually. And tonight you're actually, you and Manny have removed some of the stereotypes as well, where we think attendance is poor. We think when you go in every day, you're just fighting fire with fire. You're exposed to physical abuse. I think that's the impression some of us in mainstream have when we think alternative provision.
I mean, I certainly, I can tell you that I dealt with more fights mainstream than I've ever dealt with in alternative provision. And they're
Yeah.
much harder to manage also in a mainstream setting, because in a mainstream setting you have a fight in the playground, you've got 1,000 children
Yeah,
running
got
towards that.
spectators.
And so, yeah, again, I think that is true of some alternative provision settings, but again, I don't think it has to be the
Yeah,
reality, and that it is possible to change that.
yeah. Um, so can you share a success story of a student who was excluded but went on to achieve great things?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many success stories that I could
Yeah.
share. I think, you know, we have lots and lots of children. We have a big focus on reintegration to mainstream wherever is possible. And we have lots of children who've gone back into mainstream schools and really thrived and are, you know, successful and go on to achieve great at GCSE outcomes and go on to college. We had a young person who last year came to us in year 11 after quite a serious incident in his school, but he wasn't a young person that had necessarily been in lots of trouble before, but he came to us thinking he'd just thrown away his entire education, and it was year 11, and that's hard, and it's hard socially as well for children in year 11, where there's all those kind of key moments like prom and things like that which they, you know, then miss out on. Although we have prom at HLP, it's different if you've been at a school, you know, for 5 years, and from something that you were really looking forward to, and then you lose that opportunity. It might seem like a small thing, but it can be huge for children. And he did incredibly well in his GCSEs and got grade 7s and 8s, and a grade 9 across the board. And he's now studying at the London Academy of Excellence in Tottenham, which is a selective sixth form. And I am quite sure we'll go on to university. But like you said before, that shouldn't, and isn't our definition of success, although that is what success looks like for him.
Yeah.
We also have children who've followed very different pathways and routes. And I've got a young person who came back to visit us a couple of months ago, who's now working in catering, is holding down a job. Like, that's a huge achievement for him. And his success is just as important. Might look different, but it's huge.
Fantastic. And that's it, one starfish at a time. And the impact you have on one student, the ripple effect is far reaching. And we've got Manny as an example, from a student who was excluded in his GCSE year to someone who became assistant principal. So there is hope, and we should not give up on our young people. So, Jerry, if you could change one thing about the current system or the current exclusion system, what would it be? What would be your final message to policymakers and mainstream teachers or educators in general?
I think it would be different for policymakers, educators in general. I think for policymakers, I think that we need to look at how inclusion is defined and measured, and acknowledge that in order for a school to be outstanding, it needs to be outstanding and it needs to be excellent, if we're going to use those words, for all learners and not just some. And actually how a school meets the needs of some of the children who might find it the hardest, I think, is the real sign of success for a school. And I think that needs to be considered when we're looking at accountability measures and looking at Ofsted framework, etc. And I think a real shift around some of those areas could lead to a much more inclusive system for all. And I think for educators generally, I think my thing that I would say is that we need to be curious. We need to really think before we reach conclusions. We need to listen. And I think that curiosity will change the way things are done. And I think we need to, time is difficult. We know that. Biz schools are very busy. We're all under pressure. There isn't enough time. And sometimes you don't have to respond right in that instant. And I think taking some time sometimes around decisions, around things like exclusion, talking to other people, getting advice and guidance is really important. I think when I think back to decisions that I made to permanently exclude children, which did happen, I think sometimes I made that decision too quickly. I made that decision without really listening as much as I should have done to the child. And because I felt the pressure of other staff or other students in that this must happen, because if it doesn't happen, then, every child is going to come to school carrying a knife, or teachers aren't going to work in the school anymore. And actually, I think I needed to be firmer in my own conviction, and just slow down and think carefully, and also think very carefully about the impact on that child and not just the impact on everybody else.
Thank you so much. And it's good to be reflective and reflexive, Jerry. So thank you for that. So to sum up tonight, we're being encouraged as educators just to listen, get advice, seek guidance, and be curious, so that we could give our young people a chance. So thank you, Jerry and Manny, for an informative, frank, and insightful discussion. Thanks for highlighting the gaps in our education system and for shedding light on the work that is being done and what's left to be done. We know that there is still work to be done. It is not perfect, but we're moving towards a system that is more inclusive. Thanks to those of you who've joined the discussion tonight. Mom and Dad, all the way in Jamaica, I know you're glued to your phone listening. Thank you so much for being my number one supporter. I hope you all have a takeaway, and please remember to share the podcast once it is uploaded with friends and family. Jerry, Manny, thank you so much once again, and for sparing the time. It has been a brilliant evening, one that I think has been well spent. So until next fortnight, as we say in Jamaica, walk good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.